So this is particularly weird because Beth and I are in the same room physically.
Gross.
It's so weird.
And now Chris knows that I am picking my nose constantly while I'm doing this.
Well, at least I wasn't doing what I usually do while you guys are yammering on.
Sleeping on the floor.
Sure, let's say that.
That's a weird euphemism.
This time we watched Season 11, Episode 14, At the Earth's Core.
Hey, my Earth is a saint. Oh, wait, you said core. Never mind.
Oh, but first, Happy Turkey Day.
Beth, you can't say that. People are going to think it's a rerun. We already celebrated Turkey Day in the lovely sovereign state of Canada.
It's true, we have a better holiday time for Thanksgiving, which is early October. You can still go outside and enjoy yourself.
Yeah, and it's very close to Halloween, which is why Thanksgiving is known as Spooky Bird Month.
But for our Americans, I guess it's November 22nd this year.
So please enjoy your turkey, your tofurkey, or whatever you choose to celebrate with your mouth.
Oh. And Saturday, November 24th marks the 30th anniversary of the original airing of the first episode of MST3K. It's the KTMA one, Invaders from the Deep. And also KTMA Episode 2, Revenge of the Mysterons. So as of this recording, Shout Factory will have had its Turkey Day Marathon on Sunday, November 18th. Mm-hmm. And apparently it's going to have a surprise event on Turkey Day itself.
Yeah. I mean, we can only assume since we're recording a little bit in advance of that marathon, but let's just say they showed Castle of Fu Manchu 4 times. Great choice. But there's also, yes, the aforementioned surprise on our Netflix accounts. We'll be receiving a series that's called Mystery Science Theater 3000 The Gauntlet, which I believe involves Jonah and the Bots playing the delightful game of the same name.
The premise is that they're being forced to watch all 6 movies in a row, and apparently they're encouraging viewers to do it as well. I will certainly not be doing that.
Sure. I mean, did you ever take part in the marathons when there were Turkey Day marathons on Comedy Central? Using your misbegotten black market satellite?
Well, I would record it. I would not actually watch it live so that I would be able to fast forward through all the commercials.
What? The commercials are some of the best parts.
They are in retrospect. But, and that way, if it was something I'd already seen or an episode that was kind of boring, I could go through it. For instance, that's when I got to see The Crawling Hand. I'm like, no, thank you. Yeah. So, I mean, I'd like to have that control over the experience. I would not like to just sit down and be forced to watch 6 of them in a row.
More importantly, if you fast forwarded through all those commercials, how would you know when Dr. Kat's professional therapist was on?
Indeed. Maybe we'll start a Cat's Cast later on.
Ooh, a podcast. But yes, so you will not be marathoning. I will also not be binging because I want to savor these things as they come out. I mean, Mystery Science Theater 3000 per episode is long enough. So I'll be taking these things as they come. It'll be nice to cherry pick these episodes and watch them one at a time for this show.
Indeed. Well, until we get to all of that exciting stuff, do you want to look at the last episode of the previous season?
Oh, but now it's old and I've lost interest in these fast-paced times.
Well, let's see if we can make it interesting again.
Oh, I hope so.
This time we watch Season 11, Episode 14, At the Earth's Core. The movie opens on a Technicolor Edwardian Jubilee, the celebration of an amazing feat of science. The doddering Dr. Abner Perry, played by Peter Cushing, and his financier, David Innes, played by Doug McClure, are planning the maiden voyage of their iron mold drilling machine. As they are cheerily bid adieu by some extras from the Music Man, Perry and David start burrowing down into the earth, but the machine works a little too well, and both of the men are quickly overwhelmed by the heat of the earth's innards. When they come to, they find they are almost 700 feet underground, and for some reason, they're very cold. This is never explained. They try to put their machine right and end up in an underground lake, and then crash into a strange purple-infused labyrinth populated by various rubber-suited dino-like creatures. They have some humans down there too, many sporting very unconvincing wigs, who've been enslaved by the mysterious parrot-like Mahars and their weird, vaguely Asian henchmen, the Sagoths. Though David and Perry are captured along with a bunch of other humans and placed in a chain gang, David finds his footing in the primitive world rather quickly as a champion brawler, taking down monsters and fighting off other cavemen and even attracting the attention of a Princess Dia, played by Carolyn Monroe. They are brought to a magma-spewing cave where they are separated into laborers, where David goes, or house laborers, where Perry goes, and sacrificial victims, where all the pretty ladies go. David manages to escape fairly quickly, and he ends up fighting, then befriending a caveman named Ra, and beating up Dia's ex-boyfriend, Jubal the Ugly One. He's now in good position to lead the inevitable slave revolt against the Mahars. Perry contributes too, having uncovered the Mahar secret. They need slaves to constantly reroute the lava so that it doesn't destroy the cave, but they also must keep it flowing to incubate the Mahar eggs. So yeah, the humans revolt, they smash up the eggs, and David claims Dia as his mate. But oh dear, she can't return with him to the surface world because she's a princess, which apparently trumps the earlier rule of her culture that she is now owned by David because he won her in a fight. At least she's not killed off, I guess? Anyway, Perry and David return to the surface world right in front of the White House. Oh boy.
Previously on Mystery Science Theater 3000, Max found an oversized key which unlocks a section of Moon 13 that houses a giant robot worm he dubs Reptilicus Metallicus. Also, King has decided to force Jonah into marrying her in order to boost the show's ratings. This angers Max, who's been harboring unrequited feelings for his boss all season. Will Jonah go ahead with the shotgun wedding? Will Kinga see a spike in ratings? What will Max do about the wedding as the robot worm turns? These questions and many others will be answered on the next episode of Soap! Wait, I did that joke 20 episodes ago. It's too late to fix it now. Moving on to tonight's tale, boils and ghouls, Jonah mopes in the prelude about his impending marriage. Crow rags on him because he's not a perfect hybrid of past hosts Joel and Mike, which the yellow robot thinks would be a lot like TJ Miller. First, gross. Second, I can't imagine someone less like Joel, Mike, or both than that aforementioned gross guy. Yeesh. Anyway, Jonah creates a piano-playing robot, Growler, who always sees the positive in any situation.
Oh, hey there, guys. I'm Growler. I'm an easygoing robot who likes to play the piano, but not in a showy-off kind of way.
The bots hate him. For the invention exchange, Jonah presents permanent temporary tattoos. All the simplicity of rub-on tattoos you used to find in bags of Hostess potato chips, only they stain you forever, like real tattoos. The Mads give us the Rip Taylor urn cannon, but it never gets fired. Jonah turns a low self-esteem into a high self-esteem punk by remodeling the robots with unnecessary gears and such in segment 2. Gypsy loves her new look, but she is wrong to do so. Steampunk is garbage. The sketch ends with the promise of Jonah and the bots touring as steampunk band Steamweaver, which is easily the most Elliot Kalin joke of the season. Segments 3 and 4 see the cast goofing on the movie. The former has Crow trying and failing to be a Mahar on the Satellite of Love, while Max is visited by Doug McClure in Moon 13, in segment 4. McClure, played by guest star Joel McHale as a kind of space-traveling pickup artist, coaches Max in the ways of women. The episode concludes with a TV wedding complete with past guest stars and a sea of Kickstarter backers dressed as observers. Kinga's grandma Pearl shows up to give her blessing or a reasonable facsimile thereof. Jonah's brought down to Moon 13, but surprise! Max uses his monster key to unleash Reptilicus Metallicus. The robo-worm gobbles Jonah up. Kinga curses out Max for ruining her wedding, and the bots try warming up to Growler in the wake of Jonah's apparent death. This cliffhanger ending is more or less resolved over the episode's end credits, where a man in a spacesuit is seen spacewalking towards what I assume is the Satellite of Love's front door.
So how'd you like the show?
I liked it just fine. This is a fun movie. I really enjoyed watching it, actually. It's very goofy. It's very colorful. Peter Cushing is a goddamn delight. And I'm always happy to see Caroline Munro in something, even if it's not in much.
Right.
The episode itself had some good goofs, even though I'm not sure necessarily how successful the plot arc elements are with this season, because, I mean...
It was not.
Who cares?
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, I liked it. What about you?
Yeah, same. I would say pretty much exactly the same. It's a really fun movie, very colorful, very goofy. You can tell that they threw a lot of special effects at the wall just to see what would work, and a lot of them don't.
What are you talking about? They're amazing.
The rear projection especially made me almost throw up because it was so badly done with the very first monster fight. The riffs were pretty good. I found that there was a lot of reference humor. Like, it was very heavy on that.
In an episode of Mystery Science Theater 3000, you say?
Yeah, but for some reason it really stuck out for me more than it usually does. I mean, they were still well done, But I think I appreciate the most when they just pointed out some of the silly assumptions going on. Like at the beginning, they go inside this giant drill that is also basically a life pod. And this is the great, amazing feat of science that they are inaugurating. But they also happen to have TVs in there, which is apparently, where they point out this is actually much more interesting. This is much more of an impressive invention. But I also want to mention, because the bots didn't, why would you need a TV if you're drilling in the middle of the core? What are you looking at?
Well, you want to see if there's magma approaching. You're going into the Earth's core, or you might end up in China.
Once you see magma, I think it's probably too late. Yeah, I think it was middle of the road. As I already indicated, I'm not a huge fan of the arc, and I found the inclusion of the fans.
Oh yes, the Kickstarter crew. Yeah,
I found the inclusion of the Kickstarters to just stick out like a sore thumb.
Sure. I mean, that was one of the rewards, so it had to be in there.
I guess so. Especially Beardo. Come on. The makeup, the Observer makeup over the beard did not work.
Well, that's just in the proud tradition of the Adam West Batman, where they painted over Cesar Romero's mustache, for he refused to shave it.
They actually painted it the same. Anyway, so I found that a little bit hard to watch, but the movie itself was fun, and I like the energy they brought to it.
Yeah, and I think I know why those TVs were there. It's so that, our good pal, the Doctor played by Peter Cushing, could watch his stories. He's got a lot of Victorian soaps he wants to watch.
Speaking of Peter Cushing, I did not know a lot about this actor before this movie. I did not.
That's crazy.
I looked.
Get out of here. The music's playing you off.
I knew the name, and then I'm like this guy's really good. Like I would agree, he's definitely the best part of this movie. It's a wonderful creation, the Dr. Adler Perry. He's like Mr. Magoo crossed with like Sherlock Holmes in a weird way. Like he's like whoop, whoop, whoop. He's just like that the whole time. And so I was astonished to realize that he is Grand Moff Tarkin, which is like the polar opposite of this character.
So you didn't think that the frail British guy could look like another frail British guy?
It didn't occur to me right away when I saw the two, and I'm really impressed by the range of this man. Because, no offense, I love Donald Pleasance as much as the next person, but you usually see him playing a certain role. So it was really it's really something to see someone play so off like what their most famous role is.
Whoa, hold on a second. Couple of points there. Beth, how many Donald Pleasance movies have you seen?
2.
On this show, yes.
Yeah.
Where he's both playing dictatorial types. No. And is Grand Moff Tarkin Peter Cushing's most famous role? Possibly. Is it his calling card role for his career? No, because he died shortly after Star Wars.
Okay.
Not long after, anyway.
No, my impression is he started his career, it didn't go very well, and then he kind of had a late career renaissance.
Well, it's hard to tell with Peter Cushing because much like John Carradine or Donald Pleasance, he's always been old.
Right.
He was born old. He really rose to fame. I mean, I've seen some great stuff with him, but I think he's most prominently associated with his work for Hammer Film Studios and, to a lesser degree, Amicus Film Studios. More on that later. But yeah, he's best known, I guess, for kind of these two titanic dual roles in horror movies. He played, on the one side, the crusading, kind-hearted vampire killer Van Helsing in the Christopher Lee Dracula movies.
Right.
But he was also the only person to ever play Dr. Victor Frankenstein as a terrifying being in the Hammer Frankenstein pictures.
Oh, and I'm seeing here he played Sherlock Holmes. That is appropriate casting.
Yeah, that is perfect casting. I would say that's better casting than Basil Rathbone, who is arguably the best Holmes.
No.
Oh, you're a big fan of Gene Wilder as Sherlock Holmes' other smarter brother?
I am not. My favorite is
Jeremy Irons.
Jeremy Brett.
I know, I'm just goofing.
Yeah.
No, I know for a fact that your favorite is Matt Frewer, where he did it with a bad British accent. Several movies for Hallmark. But no, you gotta go with Basil Rathbone. He's tall, he's lanky, he's lean, and he looks like he could throw a punch, but he also looks like a drug addict. It's perfect.
Exactly. So what did you think of what he did with the role here?
Well, I think that the brilliant thing with Cushing is that he always manages to invest a lot of humanity in his part. So here you have, like, I think a pretty generic daffy scientist role, although there's some good lines in the script for him, one of which was sadly cut. The oft quoted line from this movie, which is not in the misdeed version, is, "You can't mesmerize me, I'm British."
You cannot mesmerize me, I'm British.
I love it.
Yeah, and Peter Cushing is a man born to deliver that line. But he takes something that is, like, again, I think a very stock standard kind of character and makes it into something really funny and fun to watch. Like, I don't know about the other actors, but Peter Cushing is definitely playing this like he's in a comedy.
Yeah, I would agree. Like, the other actors are playing it more serious, and because everything's so daffy, it kind of drags the movie down a little bit. But the energy just livens back up when this very frail-looking old man is in the picture.
Yeah. And, he's the one who knocks over that, flame-breathing dinosaur who explodes in the highlight of the movie. I'm sorry, but when a character or monster suddenly explodes into flames, I will always be delighted. That was the best part.
Or when he, like, reinvents the bow and arrow for everybody, and he's a really good shot.
Yeah, but he is very funny, and he's, like, playing up the mannered British gent to total comic perfection. Like when Doug McClure pours him a drink real early on in the picture. He's like, "Oh, no, I'm driving. I can't possibly have anyone. And you're driving too." So he just hands the drink to, like, a stranger who happens to be walking by.
Yeah.
It's great. Like, he seems to be at once an extremely sharp mind and totally out to lunch, and he's playing that perfectly. I'm reminded of when Amicus Studios, who released this picture, adapted Doctor Who into a series of movies. They made a couple of movies based on Dalek stories. Mm-hmm. And Peter Cushing, they rewrote it so that instead of being about a time-traveling alien, it's just about a time-traveling, eccentric scientist man. And Cushing is playing the part not dissimilarly to how he's playing it here. Mm-hmm. But again, he's given this kind of, like, stock character, and he makes that kind of mesmerizing. It's sort of tragic that because those movies contradict the show, they've been made non-canon, and that means that the best actor to ever play the part of the Doctor is considered to have not played it.
Oh.
Yeah, but he's great. He's great in everything he's in, whether he was doing something that he was extremely invested in or just doing it for the paycheck. Like, he brought something to it. I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that Peter Cushing, as was often the case with these big British stage actors who played these rich roles, was a pussycat in real life and was a super nice guy, like extremely kind-hearted. Yeah. He was said to be extremely gentle, and I've seen a few interviews with him and read a few interviews with him, and that's certainly the case from what I can tell. And he just comes across as very genteel. The director of this movie, Kevin Connor, described him as chain smoking, but always wearing cotton gloves so that they wouldn't possibly stain his fingers.
What a lovely touch. And plus, he can stand up to Darth Vader.
Yes, he could. He was the only one really to bitch out Darth Vader, which I think was pretty great. I mean, then again, he is at that point slightly scarier looking than Darth Vader because Peter Cushing looks very cadaverous in the 70s, but. He's been in so many movies. I saw him, of course, mostly in the horror movies that he did. And his real winning touch is that he was always believable. He had these extremely sensitive eyes that could project real emotion, no matter how kind of loony the concept was. You see that here. Mm-hmm. And I also think that somehow, I think possibly because he was such an austere, kind of reserved gentleman, that he could kind of bring that out and play that up to a sinister quality, which is why you have him where he's so great as Dr. Frankenstein, or in the amazing movie The Flesh and the Fiends, where he is a doctor who is getting grave diggers to provide him with fresh bodies for medical students. He is utterly sinister there, perhaps overshadowed only by the more ruthless of the two grave diggers, Burke and Hare, played by Donald Pleasant. Speaking of,
Everyone take a drink.
Yeah, there's a new game on this show. Well, I say new like it hasn't been going for like 40 episodes. But he is also, like, Pleasance shares the screen with him on one of his best credits. Have you ever seen the TV movie version of George Orwell's 1984?
I have not.
Oh my God, it's a treat. It was done live for BBC back in 54. Yeah. There's, of course, because of the way the BBC film things, one of those was totally wiped. So we only have evidence of the second performance. And apparently Cushing sort of rued that fact in his life, because apparently he felt the second performance was not his best. He felt he nailed it the first time and didn't do as well the second time. But he plays Winston.
Oh, okay.
And it's quite interesting because the humanity is there. But, you know, you really get the sense that the relationship that our two human rebels have is a really sexual one in 1984. That was the sense that I kind of got from it. Whereas with Cushing, and also because of TV standards of the time, it really comes across more as love. I think it's hard to picture Cushing playing lust. Partially that's because, you know, he is more famous as an older actor, but he also seemed to only have eyes for his wife Helen, who he was totally devoted to.
This guy is so sweet.
He is extremely sweet. And naturally I have to bring some bitter to that sweetness. Helen passed a fair bit before Cushing, and this was said to kind of forever break his heart. And it got to the point that Cushing was believed to be kind of deliberately pushing himself physically more and more so that he might incite a heart attack so that he would be able to join her sooner.
Oh my.
Yeah. But that was just the sort of love that he had for her. It's a very strange kind of thing. But that's what I've often heard, is that he'd be running upstairs and things like that just because there was a part of him at that point in his life that he was chasing death out of love.
Wow. Sounds like a good Amicus movie.
I'd watch it.
Speaking of which, would you say Amicus Productions, are they the equivalent of Hammer Studios?
They're more like Hammer's little brother.
Hammer's little brother. What do you mean by that?
Well, they were never as big as Hammer, as far as I could tell. Hammer, of course, hit it big with their Frankenstein movies, their Dracula cycle, all these things that were borrowed from the Universal monsters, even more than literature. Because, of course, famously, Christopher Lee as Dracula, Peter Cushing's lifelong pal, would refuse to say lines unless they were taken directly from Bram Stoker's novel.
What?
Because Christopher Lee could be kind of a dick. And Amicus was started by two Americans in England. It was started there by the writer of this movie and its producer, Milton Subotsky, and the money man, Max J. Rosenberg. And their intent was to follow in the footsteps of a famous Ealing-produced anthology movie called Dead of Night, a horror film. And so Amicus is really best known, I think, for its horror anthologies, many of which star Peter Cushing, the best of which is called From Beyond the Grave, which in its second segment features both Donald Pleasance and his daughter as a devilish father and daughter duo.
Fun.
Yeah. And of course, Peter Cushing plays a lot of kindly people and a lot of horrible monsters, and it's great. But much like Hammer did with Sherlock Holmes when they produced the Peter Cushing Hound of Baskerville, Amicus was looking to break out. I mean, by the 1970s, the kind of tamer, once controversial, once outrageous horror that both Amicus and Hammer were producing was totally out of date by the time you get to, say, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and The Exorcist that the Americans were producing.
Mm-hmm.
And British censors were a lot tougher on violence than American censors ever were. So this is where you see them dabbling in the adventure genre. This is a follow-up of sorts to a previous Edgar Rice Burroughs adaptation. They had done The Land That Time Forgot.
Yes, and it was quite successful.
Yeah, which prompted this movie. And, you know, it's I mean, it's fun. I enjoyed it. I certainly enjoyed this film, but it's a cheesy fun time. And I have to say, the thing that really impressed me is that I think Amicus, to an even greater degree than Hammer, I mean, neither had as much money as you think, but they're both able to stretch out their dollar quite well. And so you had films that were really like lavishly lit, and you would have kind of wonderful special effects that were the best they could do. So rather than say rare projection and blue screening, traditionally you're looking at like a lot of front projection, which we sort of described with Puma Man, as it would be done successfully with the Zoptic process with the Superman pictures.
Right.
So you're seeing more of that for like the effects with the iron mole when that starts drilling.
Which, admittedly, the stuff with the iron mole is not bad at all.
Oh, the iron mole miniature is terrific. That iron mole rules.
Mm-hmm.
But you get, mostly, if you're looking at Amicus movies, they've done the occasional horror historicals, which, say, Hammer was best known for. Like, all of Hammer movies, well, not all of them, but a lot of their horror movies were period pieces. Because, of course, they're adapting Dracula and Frankenstein. And Amicus tended to set their stuff in the modern day, but it got so tight with money that towards the end of it, I mean, my God, Beth, they were collaborating with Canadians.
Oh no!
Yeah, and I can prove it, because on the very first episode of Megaphonic Podcast, A Part of Our Scaritage, they did a anthology movie about killer kitty cats, which is featuring Peter Cushing in the host segments, in the revolving story, and of course in the third segment, you guessed it, Donald Pleasance.
He gets around, that guy.
Oh my God, whether it's with movies or ladies, Donald Pleasance is there. The original bad boy. I mean, I tell you, how many times, Beth, in your past were you not tempted outside of school when you look outside and there's Donald Pleasance with his shirt off drinking a Diet Coke? Every time.
The Earth's Core was their second last movie, according to Wikipedia. Anyway, they did.
That's not true.
Looks like their last one that's mentioned on their Wikipedia page is The People That Time Forgot, which I am assuming is a sequel to The Land That Time Forgot.
That's correct, but I'm pretty sure, and I'm going to double check this right now because I could have sworn that's wrong. What's the copyright date on People That Time Forgot, by the way?
1977.
Yeah, the Uncanny came out in 1977, but their last movie, I thought, was a 1981 horror musical called The Monster Club.
That would certainly be the way to go out.
Yeah, it's got Vincent Price, John Carradine, and Donald Pleasance.
So Wikipedia actually lists The Uncanny and The Monster Club as after Amicus, after Milton Subotsky has relocated to Canada and is making films separately.
What?
I mean, it is Milton Subotsky, but it is in fact the Rank organization.
Oh, I see. So late breaking news, listeners. That's correct. The People That Time Forgot is the last Amicus movie. Milton Subotsky relocated to Canada to try and keep the horror anthology game afloat with such movies as The Uncanny in 1977 and The Monster Club.
But then he eventually went on, apparently, one of his final credits was The Lawnmower Man, 1992.
I think that if I were to give him any credit, it's probably for that wonderful scene in which two characters are trying to have sex in VR, but Jeff Fahey turns into a weird frog goo monster that goos a lady into unconsciousness.
Can't wait to see it.
Please watch The Lawnmower Man, everybody. But as a result, he collaborated, Subotsky had hired Kevin Conner, who directed this film, and I think did quite a capable job. Conner's still working today. They collaborated on this movie. Conner directed, and he directed From Beyond the Grave, which I mentioned earlier. And I really think that, if nothing else, because they didn't have the dollar of Hammer, and they didn't have the kind of literary weight of Hammer, that respectability of adapting Dracula and Frankenstein, but they produced stylish movies. And because you have Americans in Britain who fondly remembered a certain 1950s horror comic, you have the first film appearances of the Crypt Keeper.
Hooray! Yay!
Yeah, you've got the 70s Tales from the Crypt, which admittedly bears no resemblance to the HBO show, but is a very, very fun adaptation of that same material. And the follow-up film, The Vault of Horror. Of course, the first Tales from the Crypt features Peter Cushing in a great story. So there tends to be like a stable of actors for all of these British horror houses, as both Hammer and Amicus gave Cushing and Pleasance and Lee and all those guys a ton of work.
Well, Adam, we're now going to talk about something that you've already hinted you don't have a lot of respect for.
Hey!
And that is steampunk.
Yeah, steampunk's stupid. Why do you like it?
Never said I liked it.
All right, good. That's the correct answer. It's dumb.
So maybe we should explain what steampunk is.
All right, listener, you're at your computer or your phone right now. Just put a goddamn gas lamp on it and you're there.
Yeah, so people are kind of split on where it originally came from, but it's definitely like part of it is this interest in Victorian stories that you get in the 60s and 70s, especially any story that was by Jules Verne or H.G. Wells, like the science fiction stories. And these were the first examples of what we now consider science fiction. And so those movies like Chitty Chitty Bang Bang or Bedknobs and Broomsticks, even Mary Poppins, like they're kind of playing in that speculative realism that those original Victorian authors had kind of created. And then eventually people in the 70s started to make some books that were kind of on that theme. So are you a fan of Mervyn Peake?
I don't know Mervyn Peake.
Okay. He was big in the 50s, and he was maybe the first who really started to create universes that were based on kind of Victorian retrofuturism, like based on what we thought the future would be back in the 19th century.
Right on.
So that became a little bit more of a genre in fiction, and it eventually became called steampunk in the 60s and 70s as kind of a tongue-in-cheek variant of cyberpunk, which was also a big thing at the time.
You know what? I'm going to make another harsh stand. Cyberpunk sucks.
Yeah.
I want no part of it.
So when it became more and more popular in the 80s and 90s, and there was a lot of fiction, that's when you started to see like the actual aesthetic starting to develop, which borrows a lot from the original Wild Wild West and 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. So like I would say the actual aesthetic pulls more from the movies that you saw in the 60s and 70s. Because, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea looks pretty cool.
See, that's where I would make an amendment, is that the stuff that influenced steampunk, you're looking at, say, the TV version, perhaps, of Wild Wild West, as opposed to the terrible Will Smith movie, which certainly seems to inspire a lot of modern cosplay. But a lot of the retrofuturistic stuff that you see, I mean, even in old Doctor Who, you see that aesthetic. And it's like, oh, I like this because it's done with a little bit of restraint, likely due to financial reasons. There was not a lot of money going around in British and American TV in those days.
Right. A particular piece that was favored by a lot of people is from the 1960 adaptation of The Time Machine. And the actual time machine is just a very cozy-looking Victorian chair, all leather bound and very ornate, and just kind of like a ivory and gold surrounding cage on it. And it's beautiful. And I think that's where the aesthetic started to get pulled from, because of course the aesthetic that we know, if you get beyond like the clock gears and things like that, it's more about those kinds of materials like wood and ivory and brass and glass, and avoiding things like plastic because it hadn't existed in the 19th century.
That reminds me, have you ever seen the film Time After Time?
No, I have not.
Oh, okay. Well, that is another fine use of a little bit of that kind of style and restraint. It's about H.G. Wells traveling into the future because he accidentally sends Jack the Ripper into the future.
Whoops.
So he has to hunt him down.
And I would agree that steampunk is a little bit overdone. Like it eventually became kind of a fashion aesthetic, especially in the 90s.
Yeah, it's like seeing grandfather clocks in drag.
Yeah, it's a little overdone, and like eventually there were conventions and things like that, but I think there's only so much you can do with the aesthetic. Although people say they like it because it takes technology and makes it kind of more handmade and a little imperfect. But I don't know. I think there's only so many ways that you can MacGyver something with a cog.
Yeah.
But what is your favorite example of retrofuturism or steampunk in a movie or a comic.
I'll go with neither. I'm going to go with a video game, and I'm going to go with the clockwork part of Dracula's castle in Castlevania.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I would agree with that. Mine is also clockwork. It's TikTok from The Return to Oz.
Of course, Wilford Brimley.
That idea was taken to an extreme in a more recent Doctor Who episode where this mysterious alien race has managed to make clockwork so sophisticated that they are basically much like androids. And it's interesting. I think that's what people like the most about it is like the idea that you can get technology that sophisticated while still being analog, right? And I know a little bit more about watches now. They can get really sophisticated. Like there's watches that can predict the phases of the moon like 30 years in advance just because of the way they're set up.
My most sophisticated watch is I got one of those BK Jurassic Park watches. So there was a dinosaur whenever you popped up in the lid.
Still have it?
I wish.
Hey everybody, it's time for the Shallow 13.
It's time for Shallow 13. 13 quick-fire facts about this episode and the movie buried within At the Earth's Core. Go, Adam, go.
At the Earth's Core is based on the novel of the same name by Edgar Rice Burroughs, most famous for writing Tarzan, and a bit less famous for writing John Carter. When he died in 1950, he had made more money than any other author in motion picture royalties, over $2 million. J.K. Rowling must be rolling in her grave.
Burroughs owned a large ranch in California, which eventually became the Tarzana neighborhood of Los Angeles. Tarzana's public library banned the Tarzan books in the 1930s because they were so smutty.
A few decades later, Tarzana would be the birthplace of a little fella by the name of John Lovitz. Now, John Lovitz, Misties will best remember, was the star of City Slickers 2, The Legend of Curly's Gold, alongside, yes, that's right, Jack Palance of Outlaw of Gore.
Which member of At the Earth's Core worked on the third Star Wars film? If you said Peter Cushing, you wouldn't even be close. Cushing appears as Grand Moff Tarkin in the first Star Wars, while core cinematographer Alan Hume was director of photography on Return of the Jedi.
Peter Cushing identifies the winged Mahar in the cave as a Ramporhynchus. Sorry, Peter, but you must be hopped up on goofballs. The Ramporhynchus is a little short-tailed dinosaur with a long, skinny head, not a bulky kaiju who looks like Toka from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2, The Secret of the Ooze.
To be fair, the novel describes the Mahar as extraordinarily large Ramporhynchus.
Ramporhynchus.
Some of the many other extinct animals that Burroughs placed in the underground land of Pellucidar include aurochs, cave bears, woolly rhinoceroses, and dire wolves.
That was just a name for wolves he didn't like. While the violence in the film is pretty fantastical, that wasn't the case behind the scenes. Stuntman Bobby Parr's forefinger was accidentally hacked off by Doug McClure, and director Kevin Connor's eyebrows were singed off by a flamethrower used on set.
And yes, Troy McClure is in part a reference to star Doug McClure. The name is a combination of B-movie actors Troy Donahue and Doug McClure. Simpsons writer Mike Reiss was told by one of Doug McClure's daughters that the At the Earth's Core star was delighted by the homage.
Gypsy thinks David is dressed like Scrooge McDuck, which is weird because he's wearing a bowler hat and a checkered suit. In the original Carl Barks Duck comics, the DuckTales NES games, and the present-day DuckTales series, Scrooge is seen wearing a solid red jacket. In the 80s DuckTales TV series and 2013's DuckTales Remastered, the waterfowl billionaire wore a solid blue jacket. And he never wore a bowler hat. Scrooge McDuck favors a top hat. Pah.
As a train brings in the iron mole, Crow wonders,
I wonder if the conductor is Ringo Starr or George Carlin.
Thomas the Tank Engine originally appeared in shorts narrated by Ringo Starr in 1984. When these shorts were repurposed into the series Shining Time Station, Ringo appeared in wraparound segments as the tiny magical Mr. Conductor. Until a Christmas special where Ringo's Mr. Conductor met Santa Claus, played by Lloyd, by now my lungs were aching for air, Bridges. The second season introduced viewers to Mr. Conductor's American cousin, also named Mr. Conductor, played by George Carlin.
Speaking of American comics, Tom calls David Tater Salad. Chomping on a cigar, Doug McClure resembles chain-smoking Ron White, who, in a routine titled I Was Thrown Out of a Bar, tells of when the comic was arrested for public drunkenness at 17 and gave police an alias, Tater Salad. When arrested for the same offense in a different state at 34, police accessed his record and asked if the comedian still went by Tater Salad. White's association with this signature bit led to him registering tatersalad.com as his official website.
It might seem weird to mention Emerson, Lake, and Palmer in a movie with giant rubber monsters, as Jonah does during the film's opening credits. But Keith Emerson's post-ELP career as a film composer did land him the gig of scoring Godzilla Final Wars for Toho Studios in 2004.
Hearing a particularly synthy bit of music score, Jonah quips,
Music by the Bowling Green Symphony Orchestra.
Good joke, but Jonah meant to say the Bowling Green Philharmonic Orchestra. It's okay because neither Bowling Green Orchestra is real, though the Philharmonic is credited for orchestrating a single film score, John Carpenter's Halloween. Carpenter, as co-writer, director, and composer on the film, credited Halloween synth strings to the non-existent Philharmonic as a jokey reference to his hometown of Bowling Green, Kentucky.
And that's time.
Ah, Beth. So now we get to turn our respective attention to colonialism, which, from what I understand, involves a lot of pith helmets.
It doesn't seem very colonial, right? Like they just kind of stumble into this world and end up actually saving, like liberating a group of people from slaveholders, which seem to be the opposite of colonialism, which is about expanding your territory and taking over whoever happens to be in that territory and making them your servants.
Yeah, not a pith helmet in sight. And there's a great exchange, in the movie where, remember, they're captured by the Sagoths, and there's the exchange between Doug McClure and Peter Cushing. They're definitely intellectually superior to our captors, referring to the humans. They seem a pretty subhuman species, and yet they're the master race. And I believe it's McClure who says, "Isn't that always the way?"
Oh boy. This movie is coming straight out of imperial romances like H. Rider Haggard and King Solomon's Mines, or even Arthur Conan Doyle's The Lost World. Like, that's very much what is inspiring Burroughs here.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is that it is very much of a colonial mindset. And even though like kind of the worst of it has come out here, like they're not specifically Africans, at least in the movie version, like that is what is actually happening here. So in any kind of Lost World scenario, you're basically traveling back in time, because with colonialism in the 19th century, that's when you have this first idea, this has never really happened before, that people live in different time periods. Like the people who are in Africa are living in an earlier stage of humanity. Mm-hmm. And that's not really something you encounter as a thought before. And it's great because it gives you justification to act like they're gods because you're more sophisticated than them.
Yes, but aren't like the more primitive people the ones to be, sided with and given sympathy towards? Because I have it on good authority that the gods must be crazy. Parts 1 and 2.
Just to clarify, we don't get any. Well, actually, Burroughs was more. He's 20th century, very early 20th century, so perhaps we can say he's Edwardian, which I think is just a cocky extension of Victorianism. In the kind of Haggard kind of trope, you have these adventurers, they go into the hinterlands and they see like this exotic civilization which has strange and bizarre customs that are the antithesis to the European way of life, and they typically come across two tribes: a good tribe that are nice and docile and a little bit childlike, and an evil tribe who are brutal and cannibals. And you know that the good tribe is good because they are they're ready to be subjugated by the Westerners, whereas the evil tribe fight back and they're very brutal.
Yeah, and you're saying that the Sagoths are the evil tribe in this hinterland who's who.
Exactly.
I always thought that we hated the Sagoths because their reliance on blast processing.
Another thing that you tend to get in these movies is that you have a love interest who is a native, and there's usually some kind of romance there. Usually she gets killed off because, of course, miscegenation is bad. Oh, and miscegenation, which means you have sex between different races, which is apparently something that people were very concerned about back in the day.
Yeah, and that would explain, too, the random and totally unfair death of that one lady in the Mole People.
Yes, that is exactly coming from that tradition. You can't miscegenate. So the whole idea about this is it justifies colonialism because they go into this world and make dramatic changes to it, but it's always for the better. It's always for liberty or some higher thought, and that's how colonialism justified itself. We're bringing civilization to these savages, right?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I found really interesting about this movie is there isn't a lot of technology. Like Doug McClure, his character, his biggest trait is that he can kick ass. You know, he actually is the most violent person here, and that's how he gets ahead, which is ironic because in my very favorite, one of my favorite books of all time, The Time Machine, that is how H.G. Wells basically indicts the colonialist practice and imperial romances in general, because it starts off with this inventor who seems very scientific and he's going to figure things out, but he slowly but surely just kind of descends into violence, because that's what it's really saying, is that's what colonialism was really all about. And so he can only hide it for so long. And so I find it really interesting that this movie really brings that rah-rah, punch, punch, punch front and center as something to be celebrated. And their technology does not have much in the way of getting them an edge, besides the fact that Dr. Perry can read what looks like Babylonian, Akkadian.
Yeah, he's a regular Egon Spengler.
Yeah. So yeah, it's an interesting movie for that. And that's one of the things I also find so striking, is that even though like the British Empire was at its decline in the 60s, 70s, you still see these really powerful ideas having a grip on the culture, not really being examined that thoroughly, because they were still very useful myths to have about what they were doing in the world. So neither of us were big fans of it, but Jonah almost gets married to Kinga in this episode.
Yeah, you got that. You've got what I consider to be an unwelcome thing of guest stars on Mystery Science Theater 3000, with the appearance of Joel McHale to kind of guide Max along for that part of the plot.
I mean, I like the guy, but all the cameos are awkward.
Yes, I mean, I love Joel McHale, based on Community at the very least, and I'm sure this was just a misguided cross-promo for the short-lived Joel McHale show starring Joel McHale.
So at one point, Kinga says,
"It is the God-given right of every American woman to become a North Korean dictator on her wedding day."
And this is true, is it not?
No.
Oh.
Well, I mean, I've been married. Nobody told me I was acting like a bridezilla at the time.
You were more of a Megalon for Bridezilla versus Megalon?
In fact, I felt like I was the very opposite. I spent most of my time just managing the emotions of everyone else around me. It was extremely exhausting.
But isn't that exactly the sort of thing that a Bridezilla would say to cover her tracks?
Well, I'll give you an example. So my maid of honor was going through some stuff at the time. But anyway, she was offering to do a pre-engagement kind of get-together. And she said, "I have the perfect place. This is a place nearby me." How convenient. Mm-hmm. It's a hookah bar, which has like a little area in the back. And I said, "That sounds nice, but I have a mother who's extremely asthmatic, so she cannot really handle smoke all that well." And my maid of honor was like, "Well, if we're not doing my idea, then you have to get someone else to do it." And I was so busy. I had so many things on my plate, like I couldn't do that. Like I had to farm it out. So I just had to go with it. And I had another bridesmaid who was supposed to be the camera person, and she forgot to show up with a camera the day that she was supposed to take pictures, and I just had to be okay with that. And I love all these people, but it was just like, I did not feel like I was just trying to keep everybody happy to make sure everything went smoothly. So it was a lovely night, but I think maybe that was because my attitude is, this wedding is not really about me. It's about everyone else having a good time. A cousin of mine had gotten married, and it was a really dreadful wedding. Like, it was just like a 3-hour ceremony, and it was, and the bad will that created in my family just like kind of never went away. And it was like a real lesson, like, make sure people are entertained, make sure there's good food, make sure they don't have to wait around too long, because they will never forgive you for it if it doesn't come off well.
Yeah, I can count on one hand the amount of good weddings I've gone to.
Yeah.
You know what I think would actually help with weddings and kind of relieving the stress of it all would be to embrace the Zilla part of Bridezilla. Now imagine this, Beth. Mm-hmm. You're about to get married. I know it seems strange, but go with me on this. All right, so you're about to get married, and you and your husband or wife to be are gathered around a very detailed miniature set of the city you live in, and the two of you destroy that rather than, say, stepping on a bottle or something as part of the ceremony. That would be fun for the whole family.
Okay, yeah. Or maybe I should just, like, the theme should be that I am queen for a day.
Ooh.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Would you be like a merciful queen, or would you be some sort of merciless monster?
You know, two sides of the same coin, right?
Mm-hmm. Colonialism.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think we've melted down all of our eggs, Chris. You have a final factoid for us?
You better.
Well, I do. So I took it upon myself to once again read the novel that the movie was based on. It's a reasonably faithful adaptation of the novel, but there were a few interesting details. First off, massive amounts of racism. Nobody's terribly surprised about this. But secondly, so the Mahars, these giant lizard creatures that are controlling the Sagoths that are then enslaving the native peoples that need to be unified by our white heroes. Did you notice anything interesting about the Mahars? Did you notice that they were all ladies?
It's a gynocracy?
It sure is. Let me read you a section from the book. Once the males were all powerful, but ages ago the females, little by little, assumed the mastery. For other ages, no noticeable change took place in the race of Mahars. It continued to progress under the intelligent and beneficent rule of the ladies. Science took vast strides. This was especially true in the sciences which we now know as biology and eugenics. Finally, a certain female scientist announced the fact that she had discovered a method whereby eggs might be fertilized by chemical means after they were laid. All true reptiles, you know, are hatched from eggs. What happened? Immediately, the necessity for males ceased to exist. The race was no longer dependent upon them. More ages elapsed, until at the present time we find a race consisting exclusively of females.
Da, da, da.
Wow. That's why no peens be seen.
In the book, they then steal a text, which is the single text with the special KFC-style recipe for how you do this, and the Mahars have to sort of track down this text and negotiate with them, lest they never be able to create any more Mahars.
I think they made some copies at some point.
You'd think, but...
I should also mention this is something that comes up a lot in Lost World genres, is they come across some kind of brutal matriarchy, which is absolutely backwards. It's amazing how often sexism is paired with racism.
Gotta pair your isms together.
Yeah, in H. Rider Haggard's She, for instance, they come across the Emma Hager, and it is allegedly a matriarchy. Although, weirdly enough, the elder is a man, and he said, if they ever get out of line, we'll take it back.
So you're saying it's she-lightful.
Yeah.
That sounds like a hoot.
If you've been affected by the issues on this show, if you want to defend steampunk, or if you'd like to ask Beth and Adam anything, get in touch with us. Our website is itsjustashow.com, or we're on Twitter at itisjustashow. We'd love to hear from you. It's Just a Show is a podcast from Megaphonic FM. Find all our fancy little shows at megaphonic.fm. And a special thanks, as always, to our Patreon supporters. You too can be cool and support It's Just a Show and access some superfan bonus bits by going to itsjustashow.com/Patreon or patreon.com/itsjustashow. And if you want to follow up on anything that was mentioned today on It's Just a Show, you'll find links in our show notes at itsjustashow.com/episode/40.
Now, we've got brand new episodes of Mystery Science Theater 3000 coming up on Netflix. Chris, is there anything that we'll be looking at in the future that possibly ties into this? Hopefully, a Peter Cushing movie, as I've got more cushion for the pushing, as the kids say.
I mean, come on. This episode ended on such a cliffhanger. Did Jonah survive? Who was that mysterious guy in red walking on the satellite of love trying to get back inside? It could be anyone. It's a red jumpsuit after all, not a yellow one. Huh? We're going to have to wait a year to find out. Oh, wait. That year has already passed. We're going to get to watch Season 12, Episode 1, Mac and Me.
Wow, what a way to start.
Oh, man. Well, Beth, I think to commemorate this episode, you and I are going to have to get in wheelchairs and go off a mountain.
and then go start a dance party at McDonald's.
Yeah. Dibs on the ball pit.
I cannot wait. Actually, I'm much more excited about this than I even was for the last season to be rebooted. This is what I think MST3K, and in particular the newer MST3K, does best, is 80s ripoffs of Spielberg movies.
Yeah, but like what?
Cry Wilderness.
Yeah, I suppose so. Is there another one, or is that it?
Harry and the Hendersons?
No, I mean like on MST3K.
Yeah, what was that other 80s one? It was that, and just basically like Laser Blast and all of that stuff, like the stuff that they do that's more 80s adventure stuff.
Wizards of the Lost Kingdom is the movie you think is Spielberg-esque?
Yes, okay, sorry.
Yeah, that reminded me a lot of Schindler's List.
Yes, I think that they have the most fun with them, and I wonder if it has something to do with the fact of nostalgia. Like, these are things that were around when I was a kid. I saw this, not in the theater, but later on TV. And I wonder if we have the same affection for those movies as the original cast did for movies from the 60s and 70s from their childhood, like from monster movies.
I was about to say it's definitely an age pull because, you do have like the Joel era and the original cast, like very reminiscent in terms of their riffs, very fondly recalling the 60s. So it's like, I think that's it.
Yeah, I hate to say that I've got the nostalgia bug, but I got it a bit.
Mac and me will do that to you. Mac and me will make you excited to live life again.
Well, we can't wait to see what they're going to do with it. So until next time.
Seriously, when are they going to do a Fred Savage movie?
Mm-hmm. And if you don't find little monsters, keep drilling in your iron mole.
And have a happy Turkey Day, everybody. Take it away, Theme Squad.